Hi, Gary Stearman with an update from Prophecy Watchers. You suffering from end times fatigue? That's a phrase that's been coined by a lot of people who've been prophecy watching for years and Jesus has not come, and they're saying, wow, am I wasting my time or what? Well, I ran across an article in The Guardian, published in England, and by the way, this article was written by a United States reporter, Josiah Hesse, reporting from Colorado Springs, and he goes through a few things of interest to students of Bible prophecy. The article starts, this week the Trump administration completed its move of the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And by the way, that happened around the time of the spring festivals in Israel, and most particularly around the time approximately of Pentecost. And all of you who are Pentecost watchers and who say the rapture, the Pentecost is a type of the rapture, as expounded in Jack Langford's book. It's called The Pentecostal Rapture of the Church of Jesus Christ. Jack and I agree that the Pentecost is a type of the rapture, but you can't say Jesus is going to come on Pentecost. Nevertheless, when Pentecost rolls around, you say, wow, could it be? And you become very excited. Well, to go on with this article about moving the capital of Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, at the opening ceremony, two of the American speakers were evangelical superstars. Pastor Robert Jeffries, the author of Israel and John, Hagee, who interpreted recent lunar eclipses as evidence that the end times were near. Fox News, meanwhile, declared that Trump had fulfilled biblical prophecy. Wow. And who's to say that he hasn't fulfilled biblical prophecy? Because there's been a stout denial that Israel has any right to the land of Israel, as strange as that seems. The ceremony coincided, as you may remember, with massive public protests in which 60 Palestinians were killed by Israeli forces. Thousands of miles away, outside of her home in Colorado Springs, Kimberly Troop sat in a cluttered basement office. She takes to heart the Bible verse in which God speaks of the Jewish nation. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who curse you. In fact, let me just turn in my Bible to the Abrahamic covenant. Kimberly Troop it happens to be a real friend of Israel and of our acquaintance, by the way. The Lord said to Abram, and I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. I will bless them that bless thee. I will curse him that curseth thee, and in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. The Bible establishes an Israel-centric view very early on. And so prophecy watchers are by nature Israel watchers. Back to Kimberly Troop. She is the U.S. Director of Christian Friends of Israel Communities, devoted to helping Israel communities, which are under siege, by the way, to obtain the things that they need to protect themselves from outlying terrorists, et cetera, et cetera. And as the author goes on to talk about her, he says, ever since she was a child in Kentucky, Troop has been immersed in Israel. Her father saw the creation of the state in 1948, the Six-Day War of 1967, as evidence of biblical prophecy surrounding the end of the world. In other words, this quote-unquote end of the world motif was born in 1948, 1967. And she's now, of course, the U.S. Director of Christian Friends of Israel Communities. She sees it as her Christian duty to care for Israel, to defend it against quote-unquote Arabs who are not quote-unquote interested in peace. And this article goes on and talks about the connection between students of Bible prophecy and the developments in national Israel. I want to take a brief detour here just for a moment. This is my personal copy of a book published in 1970 by Hal Lindsey. Maybe you all have seen this book. If you haven't, you're one of the very, very few. The Late Great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey. For a while, they said it was selling more copies than the Holy Bible itself. And what did Hal Lindsey say? Hal Lindsey, coming off of the 1967 victory in Israel, looked at the Bible, and he connected end-time events with the nation Israel. A lot of people say that starting from 1970 to the present, Hal Lindsey really kicked off a revolution, a phenomenal interest in latter-day Bible prophecy, connecting that with Israel. And in fact, the author of this article in The Guardian says in the 1970s, Troop's father was one of the millions who bought this book called The Late Great Planet Earth. And we then began to see articles on Europe, the New World Order, Mystery Babylon, all the biblical subjects that had been sort of lying dormant for many, many years came roaring back to life again. And in fact, Christianity became, in many circles, a kind of a doomsday pop culture, as this author goes on to describe. And this then brings me to sort of the meat of this article. The recent move of the U.S. Embassy has solidified the nation, by the way, not shared by the Palestinian people, that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, essential to the essential piece of the end times puzzle. And in a recent poll of evangelicals from Lifeway, you may be familiar with that, more than half of the respondents said end times prophecy was the reason they supported Israel. However, even in Colorado Springs, which in the heyday of the George W. Bush administration was unofficially known as the Evangelical Vatican. And by the way, I can remember back to the days when Colorado Springs was, in fact, a center of Christian activity. I knew a couple of preachers in Colorado Springs, as a matter of fact, who were right at the lead of articles and books on Bible prophecy, all more or less centered around the rebirth of national Israel. But, and this is where the article really goes. I wish I had time to read the whole thing. Here's a quote from Bruce McCluggage, Long of Colorado Springs. He says, "We've all been through this before." He's a former evangelical who now identifies as a, quote, follower of Christ. Throughout his youth in the 70s and 80s, McCluggage was part of a Christian movement that interpreted the signs of Israel as evidence of the last days. But for McCluggage now, after going through many, many, many iterations, after a slow burn of things not coming to pass, as the author describes it, that conviction has slowly faded. He said, it was a classic tool used to witness to people. McCluggage says, we used to go out and talk about the end times to prospective Christians and persuade them that, hey, there wasn't much time. You've got to come to Christ. We would ask, if Jesus returned today, would you go to heaven? It was kind of a threat, he says, and we thought with Israel coming together, we could hasten the return of Jesus. Well, I have to differ from that, but I think you get the thrust of the article. A lot of people for a long time have been very, very excited about Jesus coming. Why? Because things that they could see with their eyes, things happening in Israel. And by the way, as you know, evangelical prophecy watchers watch the Middle East news every day, literally, day by day. By the way, I plead guilty on this. We all watch the Middle East news because that's the center of things. The Abrahamic covenant says so. And if you look at Daniel, for example, I have Daniel chapter 9, which is considered to be the key prophecy in the entire Old Testament, pointing to all of the elements that will come together in the latter days. It talks about the Antichrist. He shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate. Well, the Antichrist sets up headquarters where? In Jerusalem, the capital of Israel. And where does he define his stomping grounds? Well, the Temple Mount, of course. Read 2 Thessalonians, and it absolutely says it. And so every place you watch, everything you look at says Israel, Israel, Israel. Now, I understand prophecy study fatigue, but way back at the beginning of the church, in Acts chapter 2, verse 17, Peter, standing up with the other 11, said, "And it shall come to pass in the last days, saith God, I will pour out my spirit on all flesh, and your sons and daughters shall prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. And on my servants and on my handmaidens I'll pour out in those days of my spirit. They shall prophesy. And I will show wonders in heaven above and signs in the earth beneath, blood, fire, vapor of smoke." And this is what I wanted to get to in Peter's quote of the prophet Amos. "And the sun shall be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the great and terrible day, notable day of the Lord come." Before, the word before. Now you go back to James, and what do you find? In the book of James, 2:31, "The sun shall be turned to darkness, and the moon to blood before the great and terrible day of the Lord come, and it shall come to pass that whosoever shall call on the name of the Lord shall be delivered. For in Mount Zion, and in Jerusalem shall be deliverance, as the Lord hath said, and in the remnant whom the Lord shall call." These are, of course, prophecies of the tribulation. Where are they focused? Mount Zion and Jerusalem. You go back to the Abrahamic covenant. What did God do? He promised the land to Abraham. Everywhere you look prophetically, Old Testament, New Testament, Jerusalem, Israel, and in particular the Temple Mount become the central focus of Bible prophecy. And those who have been excited in the last 20, 30 years, maybe 40 years, have watched Israel with advancing expectation. And they've said, it's got to happen soon, it's got to happen, and it doesn't happen. And they go to church the next week and they talk to their friends who all believe in Bible prophecy, and they say, well, look what happened in Israel, but he still didn't come. He still didn't come. And it brings me back to this article. And it brings me back to Hal Lindsey's book, The Late Great Planet Earth. You know, what can I tell you? Hal Lindsey was absolutely spot on. He was absolutely correct in The Late Great Planet Earth. And he did, in fact, awaken the world. I mean, literally the world, to the idea that advances witnessed in Israel were time markers. Israel is God's timepiece. Now, the trick is this. How do you watch with great expectation and saying, this year he's coming, and then he doesn't come? And so the next year you watch with great expectation. This year he's coming. I believe this, and this have happened. That means he's coming. And you watch and he doesn't come. And you know the drill. You do know the drill. I know the drill. I want to tell you that watching for the return of the Lord is the central calling of the Bible-believing, dispensational, premillennial, pre-tribulational Christian. And there is an art to it. And the art is moving in the field of expectation moment by moment without becoming discouraged. How do you do that? You read your Bible, you study, and what you'll discover is that bit by tiny bit, day by day, the Lord will open things to you that you didn't see the day before, and you can maintain a rather constant level of expectation without going over the top and falling back into great despair. Believe me, the Lord could come before I finish here today, and I operate within that set of parameters. And I believe that that is our calling and our goal here at Prophecy Watchers, to keep you from falling into, well, what can I say, pre-tribulational despondency syndrome. Our job is to keep you moving, looking, watching, expecting. I do. Been doing it for a long time. I expect to be doing it for many more years, God willing. And that's why we call ourselves Prophecy Watchers. We're watching. Are you? Thanks for joining us on Prophecy Watchers. You can find us on the web at prophecywatchers.com, where you can sign up for our free email newsletter, or follow us at facebook.com/prophecywatchers. In the meantime, keep watching, everybody, and we'll see you soon.